Hi guys, how are you doing today? Welcome back to Random Lifestyle Vlog. If you're new here, my name is Paulina. This channel is all about beauty that includes skincare, makeup and fragrances. Today we're going to do another makeup video and we're going to test this new Natasha Denona Xenon Palette. So this palette is inspired by Snowy Winter Night and you can definitely tell this by the packaging. And there you go, these are the shades. So I can definitely see how this kind of like icy cold wintry night inspired this palette. You can see like lots of like dark or like very icy shades. To be honest, I thought this palette would be much darker than it is. I thought it would be like a typical evening palette, but we do have quite a lot of like lighter shades over here as well. So yeah, that's a bit surprising, but it's a good surprise. So this midi palette is an extension to this palette, which is mini Xenon palette, and it was released I think a couple of years ago. So there you go, these are the shades here. And when I first saw like pictures of this midi Xenon palette, I was like, why would we need 15 more grey shades? But you know what? These palettes actually go really nicely together and they do make sense as this duo. This is not always the case. I was recently testing the new mini Triochrome palette and that palette has not really much to do with the original large Triochrome palette. But then on the other hand, sometimes those like extra palettes they just don't really seem necessary. And I think this was the case of like Love palette, which was like, the Love palette was initially £15 pink palette, and then we had this like £5 mini palette in addition to that, and the same situation with Bronze palette. It seemed like the mini palette did not really introduce anything like new to this midi palette. In this case though, it seems like these palettes go really nicely together. Like for example, I don't really see any proper matte black over here, and there's no like matte dark grey, like nothing like that. We have some like shimmery shades but nothing matte. Here we actually have this proper matte black, we have this kind of like dark cement like grey also in matte. We also have this proper beige here, and in our midi palette there's only this shade over here, and this is much more cool toned compared to this beige. Then we have this shimmery shade over here. This is like a very kind of metallic grey, whereas the closest shade to it in this midi palette will be this one, but it has completely different quality. It has more like a white gold to it and some kind of like pink sparkles from what I can tell. I think this lighter grey over here is probably the only shade that is a little bit unnecessary because it looks like something between these two shades over here. But yeah, I think like these palettes make quite a lot of sense together, even though this is like a very grey palette, like a proper grayscale. Okay, let's swatch everything. So we have Rhyme, which is metallic white. Oh, that is so buttery. Then we have Cygnus, which is sparkling foiled anthracite. Stellar, this is sparkling wet effect white. And Blizzard, matte white grey. Okay, so it was like a really good start with these three shades, but then the fourth one did not really swatch that great, did it? I mean, what is this? Okay, let's move on. So this one here is Gru, and this is Sparkling Metallic Iron Grey, Ebb Metallic Midnight Blue, and then we have Super Ionic, and this is Sparkling Foiled Silver with multicolored specks, and this is Posh. This is Matte Cream Powder Charcoal. This is Snowbow, and this is Crystal Sparkling Pink with multicolored specks. Night Sky Metallic Black. Ooh, look at that swatch. This is Contrail Matte White. Well, this didn't swatch that well either. And then we have Snert, which is medium grey. And I'm out of space. Okay, so here's the thing. I actually started my swatches from my wrist because I thought I would just swatch the £5 palette on the back of my hand here so that you can compare them. But it looks like my forearm's a little bit too short for those swatches. So I'm going to swatch the last three shades over here, and then I'm going to swatch the £5 palette, I think, over here. Okay, so we have Neve, and this is Sparkling Metallic Peony Pink. Flurry, which is matte eggshell, and then lastly we have Skift, and this is Sparkling Foiled Light Medium Champagne. Okay, so these are the swatches. I mean, to be honest, I mean, obviously this is a grayscale palette, so there's nothing really too crazy going on here like color wise, but it doesn't seem as monochromatic or as boring as I kind of expected this to be. We have quite a few shades that lean slightly pinkish, so I think that's that can actually look pretty cool. As far as the formulas go, most of these shades swatched beautifully. There are two exceptions though, and this is this kind of matte gray over here and then this matte white. These just don't really look that good, to be honest. Hopefully they will look better on my eyelids, but for now I can't really say I'm too impressed with them. Other than that, most shades have really nice finishes. We have some like really proper like foiled finishes, like some wet looks, some of them are really pretty. So I can't wait to try this out on my eyelids. But before we do that, let me just swatch this small palette for you, the mini palette, so that you can see how similar or different it looks to those shades over here, in case you maybe have this one and wondering whether you want to buy the other palette. Okay, so there you go. These are the swatches of the mini palette. As you can see, here we have those two lighter mattes. This black one here looks quite patchy on a swatch, but it's just the placement of the swatch, I guess, mostly. Because this shade actually looks pretty nice on an eyelid. And yeah, these are the swatches of the medium palette. So mini palette, medium palette. Okay, time to do some makeup. Okay, so this is what we have. I have like lots of thoughts, but obviously I'll be sharing them with you as we go. So the first thing I decided to do is to test one of these shades that didn't swatch that well, and this was Contrail and Blizzard over here. So I went with Contrail, which is this matte white. I was curious whether this is even going to show on my eyelid, but if it does, I thought this would be like a nice base for under my makeup. My skin has warm undertone, so I thought applying something really neutral over my eyelid would kind of create like a better canvas for it. So let's do just that, and as you can see, this is actually quite visible on my eyelid. Probably a little bit more visible than I expected even, and honestly looking at that swatch, like my hopes were at level 0. So what I wanted to do next is I wanted to try this Flurry shade here. This is supposed to be like an eggshell matte color, and I wanted to apply this one in my crease, but on this white base it did not really show that much. So you probably might be wondering why I'm even applying this if it didn't work in the first place, but I kind of want to recreate everything I did step by step so that you can see how all those shades actually work. So this one, as you can see, not very visible on this white base. I think this will work nicer if I didn't really have anything on. Next up, I decided to follow it up with this kind of medium matte gray, which is Snert. And this one, as you can see, shows really nicely on my eyelid. And this is, I think, the right time to tell you that I think this is probably not the easiest palette to use. Like, it's not super difficult, but if you're a beginner, this palette does require some skill. I mean, what I mean by that, there are palettes that you can't really hurt yourself with. Like, literally whatever you do is going to look nice. I guess with this palette, you kind of need to think things through, because honestly at some point of doing my makeup today on this eye, I was considering like wiping it off and starting again, which that's something that's very rarely happens to me, but you know, it's not the easiest palette in the world, as I would say. So okay, as you can see, this one actually shows pretty nicely. This is very nicely pigmented. What I think was missing about this palette was something that's like a little bit darker than this, because I couldn't really find anything like that. All we have are these like 3 really dark shades over here, and this is where I went from here, but I didn't really have anything that I felt would be like a great next step. Do you know what? I think I could actually use this dark gray shade from this mini palette here, but we're only testing this medium palette today, so technically it's like I don't have it. So the next step was this shade over here, which is Ebb. This is this kind of midnight metallic blue. So I use a little bit like smaller brush now, and I'm trying to apply it in my outer corner. So I'm kind of like packing it here, and then I'll be like blending it out. Okay, so now like a fluffier brush, and I'm going to slightly blend it, and I'm going to follow it up with this night sky over here, which is black, like metallic black, but to me it seems like it does have a little bit of like kind of like blue undertones. Maybe it's just my imagination, but yeah, I'm just going to build this color in my outer corner. Now I'm going to take this kind of like a small brush, and I'm going to apply this shade over here, which is Push, which is like a cream to powder charcoal shade, and I'm just going to draw a line along my lashes. By the way, some of Natasha's cream to powder eyeshadows blend quite nicely with like powdery shades, and some of them don't. This one I should try to kind of add to my makeup here, and it just doesn't want to blend that nice, so I'm just going to use it to kind of like accentuate my upper lash line. Okay, for my lower lash line, I'm going to apply a mixture of this Night Sky in my outer corner, and then I'm going to add a little bit of this Ebb, which is this Midnight Blue. So Night Sky first in this outer part of my lower lash line, and then I'm applying Ebb on the remaining bit. And I'm obviously going to blend it. So next up I decided to work on this gradient here a little bit more, kind of like blend it out even better. So I decided to use the fluffier brush and use this shade over here, which is Snert. And I'm going to apply a little bit of that here on the top to kind of like, you know, create this like a proper gradient. And then I went with Blizzard to blend it even further. And this one, again, it does seem to be quite visible on my eyelid. Again, it didn't swatch that well, but as you can see, it doesn't really mean much because on my eyelid, it actually does the job. Okay, so we've got that, and now we need to add some sparkles. So I decided to start with this one over here, which is Cygnus, and this one is just so pretty. So I'm using like a little bit smaller, kind of like a dense brush, and I'm going to apply it over this dark shade, but on my kind of like a moving eyelid only, so only here. And this is just so pretty. I'm also going to take a smaller brush and apply a little bit of that Cygnus shade in this kind of like a outer part of my lower lash line, but just a little bit to kind of make things connect. Then I like to apply the shade over here, which is Skift, all over my eyelid, but this shade is not particularly pigmented. So what I decided to do is I'm going to apply this flurry shade all over my eyelid here to give it a little bit more coverage. And now I'm going to use my finger to apply this Skift shade all over it. So as you can see, this is not particularly pigmented, but this is a lovely topper. By the way, I was actually able to see some of these swatches in more like a dim light, and they look so good. I'm obviously only showing you these in like a full light, but I think this is going to be such a great palette for like a party season. And I'm going to apply a little bit more of this Cygnus shade in my outer corner to kind of like blend everything together slightly. Okay, we're almost there, 2 last steps. So to finish it off, I decided to use this shade here, which is Rhyme, and I applied it on my brow bone. So let's do that. And obviously I need to blend it out. And then lastly, this shade over here, Stellar, will go in my inner corner. Okay, so there we go. I really love how kind of like icy, snowy those like finishes of those eyeshadows look. It gives me like a proper wintry vibe, which is actually pretty cool because I don't really expect much of a snowfall here in the UK. It's probably going to be raining mostly. But yeah, it's definitely a very wintry vibe. Okay, let me just finish my makeup off camera and I'll be back with you with my final thoughts. Okay guys, so this is the finished look. I'm actually really surprised because I did not expect to like this palette that much. The reason why I didn't expect it to like it that much is that this is a grayscale palette, and what can you do with like grey eyeshadows? Like, why do you need so many grey eyeshadows in your collection, right? I mean, it's not uncommon for Natasha Denona to create a monochromatic palette. She's done that before. She's done like, I mean, I did mention a couple of those before. It was like Bronze palette, which is like full brown palette. Then we have a Love palette, which is like all pinks. So it's not a surprise that she finally decided to do like a grayscale palette. But the biggest surprise for me was that this palette leans slightly into like deep blue shades. There are some like pinks over here. So it's not just this boring grey palette, which I kind of expected. And I think because of that, this palette is much more wearable and offers a little bit like more options to do something a little more creative with that. So surprisingly, I think this palette is worth recommending. It's just down to like your personal preference and also whether you feel like you need it. This is a grayscale palette. It's beautiful. It's like a great kind of like evening palette. I don't think I would use this as a daytime palette. It's too, I mean, it's not as dark as I expected, but the finishes of those like sparkly metallic shades are very festive, I would say. This is something that gives me like a proper evening look. So they look beautiful, but I wouldn't describe this palette as this kind of versatile all year round day to night palette. No, this is like a strictly evening palette, and I would probably say kind of like wintry evening palette. So as I said, I feel like I can be a little bit more creative with this palette than I expected, which is good. But at the same time, this is probably going to be the best purchase for those of you who are not afraid to like mix their palettes to create a look. I usually refrain to like one palette to do my eye makeup look, which is something I definitely want to work on in the upcoming year. But if you're already using like shades from different palettes to create your eye looks, this is going to be like a really lovely grayscale palette that you can use with pretty much anything. Whether you need it or not, that's another question. I don't think having a grayscale 15-pan palette is a must. I don't think you even need to have one in your collection if you don't want to. It probably depends on how much do you use like gray in your makeup. I'm actually quite happy with my purchase. I would definitely recommend testing those like sparkly shades, because I think this is what is the best about this palette. I mean, how those sparkly shades look in more like a dim light. They are stunning. So you get this like a proper frosty, eyes glazed kind of look, which is stunning. So this is everything from me today. Have you tried this palette already? If so, or even if you don't, let me know what you think about it. Thank you very much for watching. For more makeup related content, check those videos over here. I'm going to see you very soon. Take care. Bye.